Golden Age, Hollywood marriages with the largest age gaps. The Golden Age of Hollywood projected an image of romance and glamour that captivated audiences worldwide. But behind the carefully crafted publicity photos and studio-arranged marriages lurked relationships that would shock even today's scandal-hardened public. We're pulling back the curtain on Hollywood's most extreme age gap relationships. Unions where the years separating partners weren't just noticeable, they were often disturbing. These weren't just May-December romances. In many cases, they were relationships that would trigger criminal investigations today. From legendary directors marrying teenagers to stars pursuing partners young enough to be their grandchildren, these relationships reveal the darker side of Hollywood's power dynamics and the industry's willingness to normalize what we now recognize as predatory behavior. What's particularly unsettling isn't just the age differences themselves, but how Hollywood's publicity machine transformed potentially exploitative situations into romantic narratives that the public eagerly consumed. These weren't just controversial marriages, they were windows into a system where power, fame, and access created opportunities for relationships that existed in the shadowy space between romance and exploitation. Today's celebrity couples might raise eyebrows with 10 or 15-year age gaps, but they pale in comparison to Hollywood's golden age, when studio publicists worked overtime to normalize relationships with age differences that spanned decades. What made these unions possible wasn't just the different social standards of the era, but a studio system specifically designed to protect its valuable stars from criticism, even when their personal choices crossed lines that would be unacceptable. The power imbalance in these relationships wasn't just about age, but about industry clout, financial control, and the ability to make or break careers with a single. Let's examine 10 of the most extreme age gap relationships from Hollywood's golden era. Stories that force us to reconsider the romantic narratives we've been sold about some of cinema's most legendary couples. 1. Charlie Chaplin and Oona O'Neill, the Tramp's teenage bride. When Charlie Chaplin married Oona O'Neill in 1943, the age difference wasn't just noticeable, it was staggering. Chaplin was 54 years old, a firmly established Hollywood legend with decades of fame behind him. Oona was just 18, a fresh-faced debutante who had recently dropped out of school with dreams of becoming an actress. The 36-year age gap wasn't just a number, it created a dynamic where Chaplin was literally older than Oona's father, the famous playwright Eugene O'Neill. In fact, Eugene was so disturbed by the relationship that he disowned his daughter, refusing to have any contact with her after she married Chaplin. In a particularly bitter letter, he wrote that he couldn't bear to think of that little monster, Chaplin, with his teenage daughter. What made the relationship even more concerning was Chaplin's well-established pattern of pursuing extremely young women. His second wife, Lita Grey, had been just 16 when they married, after she became pregnant at 15, and his third wife, Paulette Goddard, had been around 22 when they began their relationship. This pattern suggested not just a preference for youth, but a deliberate targeting of very young, impressionable women. The timing of the marriage was also provocative, coming shortly after Chaplin had faced a highly publicized paternity suit from actress Joan Barry. Though DNA testing eventually proved Chaplin was not the father of Barry's child, the court ordered him to provide financial support anyway, creating a public scandal that damaged his reputation. Marrying the young, socially prominent Oona seemed calculated to help rehabilitate his image. For her part, Oona appeared genuinely devoted to Chaplin, remaining married to him until his death in 1977. They had 8 children together, and by all accounts, she was a loyal and supportive wife despite the enormous age difference. She famously said, "The age difference doesn't matter when you're in love," a sentiment that studio publicists eagerly amplified to normalize what might otherwise have seemed predatory. What's particularly striking about the Chaplin-O'Neill marriage is how successfully it was reframed as a romantic triumph rather than a potentially exploitative situation. Studio press releases emphasized Oona's maturity and Chaplin's youthful spirit, creating a narrative of two souls finding each other despite societal conventions. This careful spin worked remarkably well. The marriage is still often described as one of Hollywood's great love stories rather than being viewed through a more critical lens. As one film historian bluntly observed, America's favorite tramp married someone young enough to be his granddaughter. This assessment cuts through the romantic mythology to highlight the uncomfortable reality of their 36-year age gap, a difference that would raise serious questions about power dynamics and consent even in today's more permissive social climate.
I was out on the blue Pacific with a cruiser of the fleet.
2. Errol Flynn and Beverly Adland, swashbuckling into scandal. Few Hollywood relationships more clearly illustrate the industry's willingness to overlook predatory behavior than the case of Errol Flynn and Beverly Adland. Flynn, the legendary swashbuckling star of films like Robin Hood and Captain Blood, was 48 years old when he began his relationship with Adland, who was just 15. The relationship began in 1957 when Adland was brought to Warner Brothers for a dance audition. Flynn, already established as one of Hollywood's most notorious womanizers, reportedly spotted her and arranged a private audition at his home. According to Adland's later accounts, Flynn sexually assaulted her during this first meeting, effectively beginning their relationship with what today would be considered statutory assault. Despite the clearly illegal nature of this arrangement, Flynn openly traveled with the teenage Adland, taking her to Europe and Cuba, and referring to her as his protégée. Studio publicists carefully avoided mentioning her age, while Flynn's industry connections helped ensure that law enforcement showed little interest in investigating what was technically a criminal relationship. What makes this case particularly disturbing is that it wasn't Flynn's first brush with accusations involving underage girls. In 1942, he had been tried for the statutory assault of 2 teenagers, 17-year-old Betty Hansen and 16-year-old Peggy Satterley. Though he was acquitted in what became a media circus, the phrase, "in like Flynn," entered the popular lexicon as a reference to his predatory reputation. Beverly's mother, Florence Adland, further complicated the situation by actively supporting the relationship, apparently seeing Flynn as a pathway to advancing her daughter's career. Rather than protecting her underage child from a much older man with a notorious reputation, Florence effectively served as a facilitator, even accompanying the couple on trips to create the appearance of proper supervision. Flynn's death in 1959 at age 50 ended the relationship before any legal consequences materialized. Beverly was 17 at the time of his death, and in the aftermath, her mother published a sensationalistic memoir titled The Big Love, which detailed the relationship in terms that attempted to frame it as a romantic rather than exploitative connection. The most revealing aspect of this situation wasn't just Flynn's predatory behavior, which was consistent with his established pattern, but how thoroughly the Hollywood system protected and enabled him. Studio executives, publicists, and industry insiders who certainly knew Beverly's age chose to look the other way, prioritizing Flynn's marketability over the welfare of a minor. As one industry observer succinctly noted, he swashbuckled into a courtroom and got away with it. This assessment captures both Flynn's cavalier attitude toward legal and moral boundaries and the industry's willingness to shield stars who cross those boundaries, especially when it came to relationships with much younger women.
Pardon? When were you married? Well, we leave our personal questions out of this.
3. Jerry Lee Lewis and Myra Gale Brown, kissing cousins, cradle robbing. While not technically a Hollywood story, the marriage of rock and roll pioneer Jerry Lee Lewis to his 13-year-old cousin Myra Gale Brown represents such an extreme case of an inappropriate age gap that it deserves inclusion in any discussion of entertainment industry scandals. The relationship's profound impact on American popular culture and the dramatically different reactions it received compared to similar Hollywood situations makes it an important point of comparison. When 22-year-old Lewis married Myra in December 1957, he was already a rising star with hits like Whole Lotta Shakin' Goin' On and Great Balls of Fire. The marriage might have remained a private matter if not for Lewis's 1958 British tour, when a sharp-eyed reporter noticed Myra's youth and questioned her relationship to the performer. When it emerged that she was both 13 years old and Lewis's cousin, as well as his third wife, married while he was still technically wed to his second wife, the resulting scandal was immediate and devastating. British audiences and media reacted with horror, forcing the cancellation of most of Lewis's tour dates. When news reached America, the response was equally severe. Radio stations stopped playing his records, venues canceled his performances, and his appearance fee dropped from $10,000 per night to $250. In the span of just a few weeks, Lewis went from rock and roll royalty to industry pariah. What makes this case particularly relevant to our examination of Hollywood age gaps is the stark contrast in public reaction. While the entertainment industry and American public expressed outrage over Lewis's marriage, similar situations involving Hollywood stars were often treated with far more leniency. Charlie Chaplin's relationship with underage Lita Gray, for instance, damaged but didn't destroy his career. Errol Flynn's repeated involvement with teenage girls was treated as a roguish quirk rather than predatory behavior. This double standard reveals much about the power of the Hollywood studio system and its ability to shape public perception. Rock and roll, still a relatively new and controversial art form in the late 1950s, lacked the entrenched publicity apparatus and social respectability that Hollywood had built over decades. Without powerful studios to protect him or experienced publicists to reframe the narrative, Lewis faced the unfiltered public disgust that his actions genuinely warranted. The marriage lasted for 13 years, producing 2 children before ending in divorce in 1970. Myra later spoke openly about the relationship's inappropriate nature, describing how she was still playing with dolls when Lewis proposed, and how she had no concept of what marriage actually meant at 13. As one music historian observed, it wasn't just illegal, it was Southern Gothic. This assessment captures the multiple taboos broken by the relationship, not just the extreme youth of the bride, but the cousin relationship and the overlapping marriages, creating a scandal that even Hollywood's powerful publicity machine might have struggled to normalize.
Those newspaper men, Klondike miners, and now a test pilot. But this is the first time I've ever played the role of a king.
4. Clark Gable and Loretta Young, The Secret Child. While Clark Gable and Loretta Young never married, their relationship deserves inclusion on this list because it represents one of Hollywood's most elaborate cover-ups of an age gap relationship that produced a child, a deception that would last for decades and cause profound psychological harm. When Gable and Young co-starred in The Call of the Wild in 1935, he was 34 and she was 22, a significant but not shocking age difference. However, the power dynamic between them extended far beyond years. Gable was the king of Hollywood, MGM's biggest male star, and a married man to his second wife, Maria Langham. Young was a rising star, but lacked Gable's industry clout and security. What happened between them during filming has been the subject of conflicting accounts for decades. According to Young's family, she later characterized the encounter that led to her pregnancy as date assault, though she never used that term publicly. In private letters discovered after her death, Young described how Gable had come to her cabin one night during filming and forced himself on her despite her resistance. Whether the encounter was consensual or not, the result was a pregnancy that threatened to destroy Young's career in an era when unmarried motherhood meant professional death for a female star, especially one like Young who had carefully cultivated a wholesome Catholic image. Rather than reveal the truth, Young orchestrated an elaborate deception that would have far-reaching consequences for everyone involved, especially her daughter. She concealed her pregnancy by taking an extended trip to Europe, then returned to California, where she gave birth in secret. Several months later, she publicly adopted her own biological child, telling the press she had fallen in love with the little girl at an orphanage. This fiction became the official story that her daughter, Judy Lewis, would believe for the first 31 years of her life. The deception was made more difficult by the fact that Judy strongly resembled Gable, particularly in her distinctive ears. Young went so far as to have her daughter undergo painful cosmetic surgery at age 7 to pin back her ears and reduce this telling resemblance. The psychological impact of this lifelong lie was profound. Judy later described growing up with an inexplicable feeling of not belonging and being treated differently from Young's other children without understanding why. Gable, for his part, never acknowledged Judy as his daughter. He reportedly saw her only once at a party where he complimented her, but gave no indication he recognized their relationship. He died in 1960, 31 years before Judy would learn the truth about her parentage through her own investigation. Young maintained the fiction until Judy confronted her with evidence in 1966, at which point she finally acknowledged the truth but swore her daughter to secrecy. It wasn't until 1994, when Lewis published her memoir, Uncommon Knowledge, that the story became public, nearly 60 years after her conception. As one film historian noted, the King of Hollywood left behind a queen and a scandal they hid for 80 years. This assessment captures both the enduring power of studio damage control and the lasting human cost of relationships where fame, power, and age created circumstances that shaped lives for generations.
Very hard to figure. Only at times. Sometimes I know
5. Humphrey Bogart and Lauren Bacall, the iconic age gap. Few Hollywood couples have been more romanticized than Humphrey Bogart and Lauren Bacall. Their on-screen chemistry in To Have and Have Not and subsequent films created an image of ideal romance that continues to captivate audiences decades later. Yet behind this carefully crafted narrative lies one of Hollywood's most significant age gaps, one that shaped their relationship in ways rarely acknowledged in the standard telling of their love story. When Bogart and Bacall met on the set of To Have and Have Not in 1943, he was 45 years old, a firmly established star with decades of experience in the industry. She was just 19, a former model in her first film role, inexperienced both professionally and personally. The 25-year age difference meant that Bogart was closer in age to Bacall's mother than to Bacall herself. Complicating matters further was Bogart's marital status. He was in the midst of a troubled marriage to his third wife, actress Mayo Methot, known for her alcoholism and violent outbursts. The relationship with Bacall began as an affair, adding an element of moral complexity to what would later be portrayed as an ideal romance. The power imbalance between them extended far beyond age. Bogart was a major star with significant industry influence, while Bacall was a complete newcomer whose career depended entirely on the success of her first film and the goodwill of the studio. This dynamic placed her in a vulnerable position where rejecting Bogart's advances could have had professional consequences that a 19-year-old with no industry connections would have had difficulty navigating. Howard Hawks, the director who discovered Bacall and cast her opposite Bogart, reportedly became furious when he realized their off-screen relationship was developing. According to several accounts, Hawks had intended to groom Bacall for his own purposes and felt Bogart had poached her. This situation further illustrates the young actress's position as something of a commodity being fought over by powerful older men. Despite these concerning elements, the studio publicity machine went into overdrive to present Bogart and Bacall's relationship as the romance of the century once his divorce from Methot was finalized. Their 1945 marriage was portrayed as a union of soulmates who had found each other despite societal conventions about age, a narrative that emphasized their chemistry while downplaying questions of power and experience. The marriage lasted until Bogart's death from cancer in 1957, producing 2 children and a professional partnership that included several successful films. By all accounts, Bacall was deeply devoted to Bogart throughout their relationship and devastated by his death when she was just 32 years old, having spent her entire adult life to that point as Bogey's wife. The long-term impact of the age gap manifested in Bacall's subsequent life and career. At 32, she was a widow with 2 young children, having missed the normal experiences of young adulthood while caring for an increasingly ill husband in her 20s. Her attempt to rebuild her life and career without the powerful husband who had partly defined her public identity proved challenging, highlighting how thoroughly her formative years had been shaped by this age gap relationship. As one film historian observed, he gave her stardom, and she gave up her 20s. This assessment cuts through the romantic mythology to highlight the exchange at the heart of many Hollywood age gap relationships, young women trading their youth and the normal developmental experiences of early adulthood for access to power, fame, and opportunity provided by much older men in positions of industry influence.
And we loved each other. That was the...
6. Cary Grant and Diane Cannon, the controlling perfectionist. When Cary Grant married actress Diane Cannon in 1965, he was 61 years old and she was 27, a 34-year age difference that placed them in entirely different generations. Grant had been born in the Victorian era and was already an established vaudeville performer before Cannon was even born, creating a gap in cultural reference points and life experience that would prove challenging to bridge. Grant had long been one of Hollywood's most eligible bachelors, with 3 marriages already behind him by the time he met Cannon. His carefully cultivated image as the perfect, sophisticated gentleman had made him an icon of masculine charm for decades. At 61, he remained remarkably youthful in appearance, which perhaps made the age difference less immediately apparent, but no less real in its impact on their relationship. Cannon was a rising young actress with a promising career ahead of her, but she found that marriage to Grant came with unexpected restrictions and expectations. In her subsequent accounts of their relationship, particularly in her memoir Dear Carrie, she described a dynamic where Grant attempted to control virtually every aspect of her life, from her clothing choices to her food intake to her professional decisions. "I never felt like a wife," she later said in interviews. "I felt like a project." This statement reveals the fundamental imbalance at the heart of their relationship. Rather than accepting Cannon as an equal partner, Grant approached her as someone to be molded into his ideal companion, using his greater experience and industry stature to justify this controlling approach. The age and power differential became particularly evident in their social life. Grant's friends were typically people his own age, established industry figures with careers spanning decades, while Cannon's contemporaries were young actors and actresses just beginning their Hollywood journeys. According to Cannon, Grant discouraged her from maintaining these younger friendships, preferring that she adapt to his social circle rather than maintaining connections with her peers. Their marriage produced one daughter, Jennifer, but lasted just 2 years before Cannon filed for divorce in 1967. The divorce proceedings were contentious, with Cannon alleging mental cruelty, a claim that contrasted sharply with Grant's public image as the quintessential gentleman. She later revealed that Grant's controlling behavior extended to pressuring her to take LSD, which he had been using therapeutically, creating situations where her consent was compromised by the power differential in their relationship. What makes the Grant-Cannon relationship particularly significant is how it illustrates the gap between public perception and private reality in Hollywood age gap marriages. To the public and press, their relationship was portrayed as a glamorous union between one of cinema's greatest stars and a beautiful young actress. In private, according to Cannon's accounts, it was characterized by control, criticism, and a fundamental inequality that ultimately made it unsustainable. As one industry observer noted, he didn't want a partner, he wanted someone to edit. This assessment captures the essence of many Hollywood age gap relationships, where the older, more powerful partner approaches the relationship with the expectation that the younger person will adapt to their established lifestyle and preferences, rather than the two creating a genuinely collaborative partnership.
To be alone, all by myself in a great big house like this one.
7. Joan Crawford and Douglas Fairbanks. Jr., the reversed power dynamic. Joan Crawford's 1929 marriage to Douglas Fairbanks Jr. represents an interesting variation in our examination of Hollywood age gap relationships, a case where the woman was older, though not by the extreme margins seen in other examples, but wielded significantly more industry power than her younger husband. When they married, Crawford was 27 and already a well-established star with considerable influence at MGM. Fairbanks was just 19, legally an adult, but still very young, particularly for a man in that era to be marrying. The 8-year age difference was notable enough to generate gossip in Hollywood circles, particularly because it reversed the usual pattern of older men with younger women. What made this relationship particularly complex wasn't just the age gap, but the vast difference in industry stature. Though Fairbanks bore a famous name as the son of swashbuckling silent film star Douglas Fairbanks Sr., he was still establishing his own career and lacked Crawford's star power or studio backing. This created a dynamic where Crawford held both the advantage of age and professional standing, a double imbalance that shaped their relationship from the beginning. According to accounts from those who knew them, Crawford approached the marriage with the same driving ambition she brought to her career. She allegedly viewed young Fairbanks as both a romantic conquest and a strategic alliance, given his connection to Hollywood royalty through his father and stepmother, Mary Pickford. Fairbanks reportedly found himself overwhelmed by Crawford's intensity and controlling nature, creating a relationship where he often felt more like a trophy than an equal partner. Studio publicists worked to present the couple as a romantic ideal, despite industry insiders' awareness of the problematic dynamics at play. MGM's publicity department emphasized Crawford's glamour and Fairbanks' pedigree while downplaying both the age difference and the professional imbalance between them. The marriage lasted just 4 years, ending in 1933 amid allegations of Crawford's controlling behavior and infidelity. In later interviews, Fairbanks described feeling trapped in the relationship, suggesting that Crawford's greater age and industry power had created circumstances where he felt unable to assert himself as an equal partner. What makes this case particularly interesting is how it illustrates the gendered double standard applied to age gap relationships in Hollywood. While older men with younger women were generally accepted and even celebrated, Crawford faced considerably more criticism and gossip for marrying a younger man, despite the age difference being far less extreme than in many male star younger woman pairings of the era. As one film historian observed, the press saw a power couple. He saw a prison. This assessment captures the gap between the public narrative constructed by studio publicity and the private reality of a relationship where age and professional status combined to create a fundamentally unequal dynamic that ultimately proved unsustainable for both parties.
Today round the clock, well, they all like to jam. Indians on.
8. Bing Crosby and Kathryn Grant, the replacement wife. When Bing Crosby married actress Kathryn Grant in 1957, the 30-year age difference between them became a focal point of public fascination. Crosby was 53, a long-established entertainment icon known for his singing career, film success, and public image as a devoted family man. Grant was just 23, younger than Crosby's eldest son from his first marriage to Dixie Lee, who had died of cancer in 1952. The significant age gap created immediate complications within Crosby's family. His 4 sons from his first marriage were all relatively close to Grant's age, creating an awkward dynamic where their father's new wife was more peer than maternal figure. According to family accounts, the sons initially resisted accepting Grant, viewing her as an interloper who could never replace their mother rather than as a legitimate addition to the family. While publicity materials presented the marriage as a heartwarming story of second-chance love, the reality behind closed doors appears to have been more complicated. In later years, Grant, who changed her name to Kathryn Crosby after the marriage, occasionally hinted at the challenges of being married to a man old enough to be her father, a man with firmly established habits and expectations who approached their relationship more as a continuation of his lifestyle than as a true partnership. She later said she felt like a hired doll, noted one Crosby biographer, capturing the decorative but ultimately subordinate role that Grant allegedly occupied in the relationship. This dynamic was reinforced by Crosby's established position as one of entertainment's most powerful figures, creating circumstances where his preferences and decisions naturally took precedence over those of his much younger and less established wife. The age gap and power imbalance manifested in practical ways throughout their marriage. Crosby's well-established daily routines, from his morning golf games to his evening social schedule, continued largely unchanged after the wedding, with the expectation that Grant would adapt to his lifestyle rather than the two creating new patterns together. His friendship circle consisted primarily of men his own age, creating social situations where Grant was often the youngest person in the room by decades. Despite these challenges, the marriage lasted until Crosby's death in 1977, producing 3 children and presenting a publicly harmonious image that aligned with Crosby's carefully cultivated persona as the ideal family man. Grant, for her part, largely set aside her own acting ambitions to focus on her role as Crosby's wife and the mother of their children, embracing the traditional wife role that was expected of her in that era. What makes this relationship particularly noteworthy is how thoroughly it was normalized by the entertainment press, despite the significant age disparity. Articles about the couple typically framed the 30-year gap as inconsequential or even advantageous, emphasizing Crosby's vitality and Grant's maturity while ignoring the inherent power imbalance between an entertainment mogul in his 50s and a young actress just beginning her adult life. As one entertainment journalist observed, he crooned to the world and controlled her like a script. This assessment captures the essence of their public dynamic. Crosby as the beloved entertainer, whose public image remained carefully managed, and Grant as a supporting player in a narrative largely written by and for her husband.
Well, of course, I had dreams of it being finalized with marriage and babies and things like that, but it wasn't meant.
9. Lana Turner and Lex Barker. When age gap wasn't the problem. Lana Turner's 1953 marriage to actor Lex Barker represents an important case study in our examination of Hollywood age gap relationships, a situation where the 10-year difference in their ages, she was 32, he was 43, proved far less problematic than other disturbing dynamics that emerged in their household. Turner, one of Hollywood's most glamorous stars, had already been married 3 times before wedding Barker, who was best known for playing Tarzan in a series of films. Their marriage initially seemed stable by Hollywood standards, presenting a public image of glamorous domestic harmony that masked a far darker reality. The true nature of their relationship came to light in a shocking way in 1958, when Turner's 14-year-old daughter, Cheryl Crane, stabbed and killed Turner's boyfriend, Johnny Stompanato, a known gangster and enforcer for mob boss Mickey Cohen. During the subsequent investigation, Cheryl revealed that she had killed Stompanato to protect her mother from his physical abuse, but also disclosed that Barker had sexually molested her repeatedly during his marriage to Turner. According to Cheryl's account, Barker had begun abusing her when she was just 10 years old, and the abuse continued until she finally told her grandmother, who informed Turner. Upon learning of the abuse, Turner immediately ended the marriage, but apparently chose not to make the real reason public at the time, instead citing more conventional, irreconcilable differences. This case illustrates how age differences between spouses sometimes distracted attention from more serious power abuses within Hollywood households. While the public and press focused on the relatively modest 10-year gap between Turner and Barker, the truly problematic dynamic was playing out behind closed doors in Barker's treatment of his adolescent stepdaughter, a pattern of exploitation that had nothing to do with the ages of the married couple and everything to do with the vulnerability of a child in a blended family situation. The Turner-Barker marriage also highlights how Hollywood's star system could enable abusers by providing them with access to victims through relationships with high-profile partners. Barker's marriage to Turner gave him legitimate access to her daughter in a household where the mother was often absent due to professional obligations, creating opportunities for abuse that might not have existed without the cover of his marriage to a major star. Turner's handling of the situation, immediately ending the marriage upon learning of the abuse but keeping the reason private, reflects the complex pressures faced by Hollywood women in this era. Going public with such allegations would have created a massive scandal that might have damaged not only her career, but her daughter's already fragile emotional well-being, forcing her to choose between public accountability and private protection. As one industry observer noted, the age gap wasn't the issue, the abuse was. This assessment cuts to the heart of why the Turner-Barker relationship deserves inclusion in any examination of problematic Hollywood marriages. Not because of their respective ages, but because it represents how age gap discussions sometimes obscured more serious exploitation occurring within these relationships.
Well, when I'm good, I'm very good. But when I'm bad, I'm better.
10. Mae West and Chester Rybinski, rewriting the power dynamic. Mae West's relationship with Chester Rybinski, later professionally known as Paul Novak, stands as a fascinating counterpoint to the typical Hollywood age gap dynamic. A case where the woman was significantly older, held all the financial and professional power, and established the terms of the relationship in ways that completely reversed traditional gender expectations. When West and Rybinski began their relationship in 1954, she was 61 years old, a legendary sex symbol whose career had broken numerous boundaries regarding how female sexuality could be portrayed on screen. Rybinski was 29, working as part of West's Muscle Man act at the Sahara Hotel in Las Vegas. The 32-year age gap between them was almost exactly the reverse of relationships like Chaplin O'Neal or Crosby Grant, creating a mirror image of the typical older man, younger woman dynamic. What made this relationship particularly remarkable was West's complete comfort with the age difference and her refusal to conform to societal expectations about older women. Rather than hiding the relationship or presenting Rybinski as a companion or friend, West was relatively open about the romantic nature of their connection, challenging the double standard that celebrated older men with younger partners while judging older women for the same choice. According to multiple accounts, West approached the relationship with the same straightforward attitude she brought to all aspects of her life. She allegedly told friends, "I like my men young, strong, and healthy, the way they like their women," directly challenging the gendered assumptions about age gaps in relationships. The power dynamic between West and Rybinski was unambiguously clear. She was not only much older, but enormously wealthy and famous, while he had been working as a merchant marine before joining her stage show. She owned the homes they lived in, provided his income, and made all major decisions about their life together. In many ways, she occupied the traditionally masculine role in the relationship, controlling the finances and setting the terms of their arrangement. This control reportedly extended to very personal aspects of their lives. According to Hollywood gossip from the period, West maintained strict expectations about Rybinski's appearance, fitness routine, and even his sexual performance, approaching these matters with the same directness that had made her famous on screen. Rather than being the decorative younger partner, he was expected to fulfill specific roles in her life and meet her clearly articulated standards. Despite the unorthodox nature of their relationship, West and Rybinski remained together until her death in 1980 at age 87, making it one of Hollywood's most enduring age gap romances. By all accounts, Rybinski was devoted to West throughout their 26-year relationship, serving as her protector, companion, and lover even as she entered her 9th decade. What makes this relationship particularly significant in our examination of Hollywood age gaps is how thoroughly it inverted the usual power structure. In typical cases, the older man held financial, professional, and social power over a much younger woman. With West and Rybinski, every aspect of this dynamic was reversed. She held all forms of power and exercised them openly, while he accepted a role that would have been considered traditionally feminine in that era. As one writer observed, "She didn't just break gender norms, she bought them." This assessment captures West's characteristic approach to relationships, treating men as pleasurable acquisitions rather than authority figures, and establishing herself as the undisputed center of power in her romantic arrangements, regardless of societal expectations about age or gender. The double standards of Hollywood romance. What connects these 10 relationships beyond their significant age gaps is how differently they were portrayed depending on which partner held more power. When older men married much younger women, publicity departments worked overtime to present these unions as romantic ideal. The distinguished gentleman and his adoring young bride finding love that transcended mere numbers. When older women pursued younger men, however, these relationships were either hidden from public view or subjected to ridicule and gossip. This double standard reveals much about Hollywood's fundamentally patriarchal structure during the studio era. Men like Chaplin, Grant, and Crosby could marry women decades their junior without facing significant criticism, their relationships normalized through carefully crafted publicity campaigns that emphasized romance while downplaying questions of power and consent. Women who challenged age conventions, like Crawford and West, faced far greater scrutiny and judgment, even when the age differences involved were much smaller. Perhaps most troubling is how thoroughly Hollywood's publicity machine transformed potentially exploitative situations into love stories that audiences eagerly consumed. Relationships that would raise serious concerns today, like Flynn's involvement with teenage Beverly Adland or Chaplin's pattern of pursuing very young women, were reframed as romantic narratives that emphasized the younger woman's supposed maturity and the transcendent nature of the connection, rather than the obvious power imbalances at play. Behind the glamorous publicity photos and manufactured romance narratives of Hollywood's golden age lurked relationships built on troubling power imbalances. These weren't just age gaps, they were chasms that separated partners by generations, creating dynamics where youth, inexperience, and career vulnerability were exchanged for access to power and opportunity controlled by much older partners. While some of these relationships may have contained genuine affection, the extreme differences in age, power, and industry standing raise questions that no amount of studio publicity could completely erase. Hollywood didn't just normalize these problematic unions, it actively romanticized them, creating templates for acceptable power imbalance that influenced American attitudes toward age and romance for generations.